We're looking at the top 10 point guards in the NBA today. Keep in mind, while making this list, I'm not looking at the top 10 point guards last season or who I think the top 10 will be this upcoming season. I'm just saying right now who are the best 10 point guards in the NBA. Number 10 was already a tough decision. It was between Kemba Walker and Kyle Lowry, but I decided to put Kemba at number 10. He's a pretty solid offensive player. He averaged 20 points and 5 assists on 48% from 2 and 38% from 3. That's pretty decent efficiency, but these stats don't really jump out at you in any way. Most of his moves are good for an on-ball scorer, especially his step backs, which he used a lot in the playoffs. But it doesn't make sense for him to be an on-ball scorer if he's only averaging 20 points per game. And when you compound that with his lackluster defense, it kind of lowers him on the rankings. He is a low turnover player, only 2.1 per game, which compared to a lot of these guys is very low. But he doesn't have the star power, and he doesn't have the stats to put him any higher than number 10 for me. Number 9 is Kyle Lowry. So Lowry had similar stats to Kemba. 19 points, 8 assists, 5 rebounds on 50% from 2 and 35% from 3. Again, these numbers aren't going to jump out at you, but most of his value does not show up in the box score. He's really good at drawing charges. That's an underrated aspect of his game. And charges are high leverage plays that can swing close games. He's a great leader. Toronto had a lot of injuries last year, and it was Kyle Lowry's job to carry them through. And they played through it, and they were a good team, even though they had a ton of players getting injured. His efficiency isn't bad. 50% from 2 is pretty good, and 35% from 3 isn't terrible. Other than that, though, there isn't really much that jumps out at him. He's a good defender, but other than that, there really isn't much about him that makes me want to put him higher than number 9. Number 8 is Trae Young. So here's something crazy for you to think about. Young shoots the same percentage from 29 feet, which is considered an extremely deep 3, as he does for threes as a whole. So he shoots 36% from 3 and 36% from 29 feet out, which is crazy efficient. To put it in perspective, guys like Curry generally shoot around 40% from 29 feet, so that's a really good sign for the future that Trae Young could possibly be a Curry-like player. He averaged 30 points and 9 assists last season, but on poor efficiency, 44% from 2, the aforementioned 36% from 3. Again, those efficiencies make me want to put him lower, but I think he's only inefficient because he's the only scoring threat in Atlanta, and defenses can just load up on him without really having to worry about anyone else. At number 7, I have Ben Simmons. So Ben Simmons is one of the most difficult players to rank because he's not even like a point forward. He's a point big man. Really, in the half-court setting, he functions as a big man who can pass. He averaged 16 points and 8 assists and 8 rebounds on 58% from 2, 29% from 3. He makes most of his shots at the rim, and in fact, he was in the 93rd percentile of finishing at the rim, and 90% of his attempts are inside 8 feet. That's good. He knows that he's good at the rim, and he's taking most of his shots there, which is nice. And another good aspect of his offense is that he's really good at driving kicks, and he assists more threes than anybody else in the league. Obviously, he is a terrible shooter, and if you want him to be one of the best players on your team, you need a shooting team around him, which is what the 76ers tried to do when they got Danny Green and Seth Curry this offseason. He's a really good defender, which isn't talked about him a lot. In fact, he spends more time than anyone else in the league guarding all NBA players, and he led the league in steals with 2.1. But all of his inconsistencies and his health make it hard for me to rank him past number 7. Number 6 is Russell Westbrook. It's really disappointing to have to put a former MVP, who's still playing at roughly MVP level, this low, but I just had to do it. He averaged 27 points 8 assists, and 7 rebounds on 47% from 2 and 26% from 3 this season. He is the most athletic and aggressive point guard in the league today, and one of the most in NBA history. He excels in transition, where he moves super fast and will either get a layup or dunk at the rim, or kick it out to a shooter or possibly a lob. And in fact, in my mind, he's an underrated passer. I think he's one of the best 3 in the league behind Jokic and possibly LeBron. You really have to recognize, though, that this passing comes with a price, because he averages 4.5 turnovers per game, which is ridiculously high, especially for only 8 assists. But there was a period last season in around January and February when he stopped shooting as many threes, and his efficiency started to go up. And in that time, he shot 35% from 3, which was a lot better than his 26% mark for the season. And that 35% mark was mainly due to him just picking his shots better. So if Westbrook can just improve on his basketball IQ, he could find himself near the top of this list. Number 5 is Chris Paul. It's so much more embarrassing that Westbrook is 6 when Chris Paul's ahead of him, and they were just traded for each other last offseason. In my mind, Chris Paul kind of did everything Kyle Lowry did, but a whole lot better. He averaged 18 points, 7 assists, and 5 rebounds on 49% from 2 and 37% from 3. 91 from the free throw line, which is really good. These stats, again, aren't super impressive, but his team success and his leadership and defense don't show up in the box score, but they are high leverage attributes that help the Thunder really exceed their expectations last season. He's undersized, but as I mentioned, he's a great defender, and he led the league in steals for several seasons. He thrives in the mid-range, and he especially loves his mismatches against bigs like Rudy Gobert, and he makes 53% of his shots in the mid-range. The final thing about Paul is that he's a clutch player. The Thunder were 29-13 in clutch situations, and they were so close to beating the Rockets in a 7-game series. Number 4, I have Kyrie Irving. Kyrie averaged 27 points, 6 assists, and 5 rebounds last season on 48% from 2 and 39% from 3, and 92% from the free throw, which is very close to 50-40-90 actually. In my mind, he's the greatest dribbler of all time, but the ball does tend to stick to his hands, and he doesn't pass as much, as you can see with the only 6 assists. However, he only averages 2.6 turnovers, which isn't bad for his extremely high volume scoring and decently high volume passing. 65% of all his shots are at the rim, and he has very good efficiency from there. He especially loves all his finesse layups and shots from there. So the Nets scored 6.4 points more per 100 possessions when Irving is on the floor, which is really good offense. But their record was 8-12 with Kyrie, and they had a 500 record without him. So it's really tough to rank him because even though he's individually a great player, his team was more successful without him than with him. So we'll really have to see this season to figure out how good he really is. Number 3 is Damian Lillard. Lillard averaged 30 points, 8 assists, and 4 rebounds on 46% from 2, 40% from 3, and 89% from the free throw, which again is pretty close to 50-40-90. From super deep threes, 29 feet, Lillard shoots 41%, which is crazy efficient. Defenses have to guard him basically the moment he passes half court. And we've seen what happens when defenses don't do that. With his game winners you see against Paul George in the playoffs last two seasons ago. He's an underrated aspect of his game is that he's a good finisher, actually. He's fairly athletic, so he can go to the rim or he can shoot the 3. And he doesn't operate as much in the mid-range, but that's where CJ McCollum comes in and kind of takes over for him. He's also a very clutch player, and he'll have explosive games, like the 60-point game against the Nets earlier this season, which was one of the best games of all time, actually, according to GameScore. The final thing about him that doesn't show up in the box score is that he's a good leader who makes his teammates better, which is similar to guys like Kyle Lowry and Chris Paul. And number 2, I had Luka Doncic. Luka averaged 29, 9, and 9 last season on 46% from 2, 32% from 3, and 76% from the free throw line. Again, those efficiencies don't really jump out at you, and they made me want to put him below Damian Lillard. But, again, it's because he was really the primary scoring threat for the Mavericks, and they didn't have anyone else who was even near Luka's level last season. So defenses would just load up on him, and he would have pretty poor efficiency because of it. And it's also because he has an extremely high volume of shots. He averaged 9.8 threes per 36 minutes last season, which is crazy high. The Mavericks' offense improved by 4.4 points when he was on the floor, which is a good sign for the future, and he's an underrated passer, especially in drive and kick scenarios. He's a really bad defender, and his footwork is something that really needs to be worked on. A lot of the times he'll cross his feet and trip over himself, and he'll just allow drives to the lane or step backs in that situation. And the final thing about him is his high turnover style. He had 4 per game this season. But again, I'll chalk that up to him being the only scoring threat and defenses loading up on him. Finally, and of course, I had to put Steph Curry at number 1 on this list. Curry's stats last season were 21, 7 assists, and 5 rebounds on 40% from 2 and 25% from 3, which are bad. Those are just bad stats for someone who's the best point guard in the league. But he only played 5 games, and I think that he'll return to his MVP form this season. And in fact, the season before Durant joined, Steph averaged 30 points, 7 assists, and 5 rebounds on 56% from 2 and 45% from 3, which is, he was basically as efficient from 3 as Luka and Damian Lillard were efficient from 2, which is just absolutely crazy. And of course, yeah, he was in the 50-40-90 club that season. Obviously, he's an incredible shooter. He's the best shooter of all time, as you can see with that 45% from 3 on good volume. The other thing about him is that he's an underrated pass interceptor. He averaged 2.1 steals per game in his MVP season, which led the league. So not only was he great on offense, he also wasn't a liability on defense. Anyway, that's it for my list. This is JB. Keep pushing the pace. I'm signing off.